Act like you're hugging me, she whispered to a stranger, never knowing that this one desperate plea would change her life forever. What she didn't realize. The man beside her wasn't just anyone, he was a billionaire, and her future was about to take an unbelievable turn. The late afternoon sun was fading, casting long golden shadows across the city park. On a weathered bench near the fountain sat Emily, clutching her worn-out handbag as if it carried the last piece of her fragile world. She had just left her shift at the diner, her second job of the day, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. But beneath the tiredness was something else, loneliness, a quiet ache she had learned to carry in silence. As she stared blankly at the children laughing near the swings, her peace was suddenly interrupted. A group of rowdy young men stumbled into the park, loud, mocking, and careless. Their voices cut through the air like knives, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Emily's heart began to race. She knew the way they looked at women, predatory, taunting. She had seen it before, and she wanted no part of it. The men's laughter grew louder as they noticed her sitting alone. Panic gripped her chest. She could feel their eyes on her, feel the cruel amusement that often came before ridicule or worse. She shrank into herself, wishing she could disappear. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the man sitting just a few feet away. He was quiet, composed, and oddly out of place. His clothes were neat but simple, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed attention. Something about his calm presence felt safe, like an anchor in a storm she hadn't expected. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as the group of men began moving closer. In that desperate moment, her courage rose not from confidence but from survival. She turned to the stranger, her voice trembling, barely louder than a whisper. "Act like you're hugging me, please." The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could second-guess herself. For a split second, she regretted it. What if he thought she was crazy? What if he refused? But then, slowly and without hesitation, the man's arm wrapped gently around her shoulders. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It was protective, steady, reassuring. The kind of embrace that said, "You're safe now." Emily held her breath as the group of men glanced at them, scoffed, and finally turned away. Relief washed over her like a tide. What she didn't know in that moment was that this simple, desperate plea, the hug she asked for out of fear, would become the turning point of her entire life. The air around Emily seemed lighter once the rowdy group disappeared into the distance. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been gripping her bag until her knuckles ached. Slowly, she let out a shaky breath, the kind that carries fear away with it. For a moment, she sat frozen in the stranger's embrace, reluctant to move, because for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Embarrassment quickly crept in. She pulled back slightly, her cheeks flushing. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know what else to do." The man turned his gaze toward her, his eyes calm and steady. A small, reassuring smile curved on his lips. "You don't need to apologize," he said softly. "Nobody should ever have to feel unsafe. You did the right thing." Something in his voice disarmed her. It wasn't just the words, it was the sincerity behind them. Emily studied him for a moment. He didn't look annoyed, or bothered, or inconvenienced. Instead, there was kindness in his expression, as though protecting her, even as a stranger, was the most natural thing in the world. The awkward silence between them slowly melted. Emily managed a weak laugh, shaking her head. "You must think I'm crazy, asking a complete stranger for something like that." He chuckled lightly, not mocking her but easing the weight of her embarrassment. "Crazy? Not at all. Brave, maybe. And smart. You knew you needed help, and you asked. That takes more courage than most people realize." Her heart softened at his words. She couldn't remember the last time someone had told her she was brave. Most days, she felt anything but. The two of them sat there, the park alive with fading daylight around them. Slowly, their conversation began to flow. Emily told him bits about her day, about working long shifts and how life sometimes felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She hadn't meant to open up, but there was something about this man, something steady and safe, that invited honesty. And though she didn't know it yet, the stranger wasn't just listening out of politeness. Every word she spoke, every glimpse of struggle she shared, was etching itself into his heart. What had started as a simple act of protection was beginning to turn into something much deeper. Because that hug, the one meant to be pretend, felt real. The evening breeze rustled through the trees as Emily and the stranger, who had introduced himself simply as Daniel, sat together on the worn park bench. The chaos of moments earlier had faded, leaving behind a fragile sense of calm. Emily hesitated at first, unsure why she felt the need to keep talking. Normally, she kept her guard high, sharing little about herself with anyone. But something about Daniel's quiet presence and the way he listened, really listened, made her feel seen. And so, piece by piece, her story began to spill out. She told him about her mother, whose illness had forced Emily to take on responsibility far beyond her years. About the endless hours she spent juggling 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and medicine in the cabinet. About the nights when she skipped meals so her mother wouldn't have to. Daniel sat silently, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He just listened. For Emily, that alone felt like a gift. "I used to have dreams, you know," she said softly, almost to herself. "I wanted to study, maybe become a teacher. But dreams don't pay hospital bills. Reality does." Her voice cracked, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the tears threatening to fall. Daniel's chest tightened. He had spent his life surrounded by wealth, privilege, and people who never had to wonder where their next meal was coming from. But here, sitting beside him, was a young woman who carried more strength in her weary heart than most billionaires he knew. "You're stronger than you realize," he said gently. "And you haven't lost your dreams. They're still there, waiting. Sometimes life makes us take the long road to reach them." Emily blinked at him, surprised by his words. No one had ever told her that before. People usually just shook their heads, called her situation sad, and moved on. But Daniel's voice carried something different, belief. She managed a small smile, brushing away a tear. "You're easy to talk to," she admitted. Daniel smiled back, though inside, he was wrestling with something deeper. Because the more she spoke, the more he knew, he couldn't just walk away from her story. He had the power to change it. And maybe, just maybe, fate had placed him on that park bench for a reason. The next morning, Emily's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar message. It was from the local community center where she sometimes volunteered during her rare free hours. The message was short and polite. "You've been invited to a special meeting at the Hartwell Foundation, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please attend, it's important." Emily frowned. The Hartwell Foundation? She had heard of it before. It was one of the largest charitable organizations in the state, known for funding hospitals, schools, and community projects. But why would she be invited? Probably a mistake. Still, something nudged her to go. The next day, dressed in her cleanest blouse and the same worn-out shoes she wore to work, Emily walked into the tall glass building that towered over the city skyline. The reception area alone felt like another world: polished marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and staff members in crisp uniforms. She almost turned back, but curiosity pushed her forward. A staff member guided her into a grand conference room. Emily's breath caught when she saw who was standing at the front. Daniel. But he wasn't the Daniel she had met on the park bench. Gone was the simple, modest look. Instead, he stood in an elegant suit, commanding the room with quiet confidence. Whispers of recognition spread among the staff. It hit her all at once: Daniel Hartwell. The billionaire. The man whose name was on hospitals, schools, and this very foundation. Emily's heart pounded. Her mouth went dry. She felt foolish, embarrassed, even betrayed. Why hadn't he told her? But before she could speak, Daniel's gaze found hers. He stepped forward, his voice steady yet warm. "Emily," he began, "I owe you the truth. When we met, I wanted to understand the world the way you see it, without titles, without wealth. Just, as people. And you showed me something priceless: courage, honesty, and strength." The room was silent. Emily blinked, tears already forming as Daniel continued. "You inspired me. And because of that, I want to help. Your mother's treatment will be fully covered. And if you're ready, the foundation has a position waiting for you, so you can build a future without sacrificing your dreams." Emily's knees felt weak. The stranger who once pretended to hug her was now offering to embrace her whole life with hope. Emily stood frozen in the grand conference room, her mind spinning with disbelief. Just hours ago, she had been serving coffee at the diner, dreading another long shift. And now, this same man, the stranger who had once offered her safety on a park bench, was offering her a future she never thought possible. Her lips trembled, searching for words, but none came. Tears slid down her cheeks instead, betraying emotions too heavy to contain. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "There are so many people who need help. Why would you do this for me?" Daniel stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Because kindness should never go unnoticed. You reminded me what really matters. Money builds walls, but courage builds bridges. And Emily, you've been building them your whole life without even realizing it." His words struck deep. For years, she had believed her sacrifices went unseen, working double shifts, skipping meals, holding her world together with trembling hands. But now, someone not only saw her struggle, but honored it. Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. Slowly, she crossed the room toward Daniel, her legs shaky, her breath uneven. And when she finally reached him, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, not a fake hug of fear this time, but a real embrace filled with thankfulness, relief, and hope. For a moment, the room disappeared. There were no titles, no billionaire, no struggling waitress, just two people bound by the simple power of kindness. Daniel leaned down slightly, his voice low but steady. "The first time you asked me to hug you, it was to protect you. This time," he said softly, "it's to remind you, you're never alone again." Emily sobbed quietly against his shoulder, the weight of years of loneliness finally lifting. In that embrace, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety, not just for the moment, but for the future. As they pulled back, Emily wiped her tears, but her smile shone brighter than the chandelier above them. The billionaire who had once been a stranger was now the reason she could dream again. And as she walked out of the Hartwell Foundation that day, she carried more than financial security, she carried the lesson that one desperate whisper for help could open the door to miracles. Sparkles, because sometimes, the hug you beg for in fear, becomes the embrace that changes your life forever.